Everybody, and thank you so much for taking the time to be here this evening. This is the first community expert meeting for CARB's community engagement model, and we're really excited to host this meeting tonight and get started on our work together. Just a quick reminder for everybody that this meeting will be recorded. Although I'm going to pause at moments to have you jump in and interpret this introduction part before we enable interpretation.
Muy buenas tardes a todos ustedes. Gracias por estar aquí presentes. Les recordamos que esta sesión será grabada. Gracias por estar aquí presentes en este modelo de participación comunitaria para que todos estén aquí presentes y si pueden permanecer con sus cámaras encendidas. You may continue.
Thank you. So in the survey that everybody completed before this meeting, there was a unanimous decision to allow all 4 meetings to be recorded and then posted to the CARB Community Engagement Model website. So the public will have an opportunity to listen in and provide comments to the email address provided. And we're also going to post the information about each community expert on our website, which was also supported in the survey.
Como recordamos, tuvimos una encuesta adicionalmente a lo que estábamos realizando. También en las últimas 4 sesiones que les pedimos, todos estaban en unánime que queríamos grabar la reunión y no hubo ningún problema e inconveniente. Además, posteriormente con la página de CARB estaremos publicando todos sus comentarios, participación o cualquier otra duda que se pueda también iniciarse. Y además vamos a tener toda la parte de la página de internet de todos los expertos que están reunidos esta tarde también para que tengamos toda la información de esa encuesta o de los sondeos.
Thank you, Aldo. And before we get started and get that language interpretation function going, I want to introduce the presenters for today representing CARB. You're going to be hearing from Jose Lopez and Lana Wong as Community Engagement Capacity Building Work Group members.
Y antes de que podamos comenzar todo esto, quiero presentarles a los participantes de CARP, a José López y a Nano Wong, que son de la Partícipe Comunidad de Integración.
Great, thank you. Okay, so now we're going to go over the instructions for using the language interpretation function.
Ahora brevemente vamos a repasar las indicaciones de interpretación.
So in your meeting or webinar controls, once we activate the interpretation function, you'll see a globe that says interpretation located at the bottom of your screen.
Breve, usted va a ver en la parte inferior de su pantalla con todos los controles que está abajo, aparecerá un icono de un mundo que dirá interpretación.
Once that function is activated, you're going to click the language that you would like to hear. So if you're listening in English, you'll need to click English. And if you'd like to listen in Spanish, you'll need to click Spanish.
Una vez que vea que aparece ese icono, que esa es la función, presiónelo, aparecerá idiomas, ya sea inglés o español. Elija el idioma de su preferencia y después presione silenciar audio original.
Yes. So if you're in the Spanish channel, thank you, Aldo. You're going to also want to press mute original audio so that you're only hearing Aldo speaking and giving the presentation in Spanish.
Así que es importante que presione silenciar audio original para que solamente escuche la interpretación claramente.
Great. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and start the language interpretation function, and please choose English or Spanish. Okay. So if you heard, Aldo went into the Spanish channel, and at this point, we're all going to choose English or Spanish. Okay, if anybody is having trouble using that function, please raise your hand or let me know. You can come off mute. Okay, I see some thumbs up. And our participant, do we have our participant in the Spanish speaking channel? Is everything okay in there? Thumbs up. Okay. All right, I don't see any hands up, so we're going to keep going. If at any point you do have problems with the interpretation function, throw your hand up, let us know, and we'll help you get back on the correct channel. Okay, next slide, please. Lillian, I see your comment in the chat. It's not mandatory to have your camera on, but we're all meeting each other for the first time tonight. So if you are able to have your camera on, we definitely invite you to do so, but understand that there might be reasons why you guys would prefer to have your cameras off. Thank you. All right, so before we get started, please make sure to mute yourself and rename yourself to your first name, last name, and affiliation. And to do that, you're gonna put your cursor over your little square on the screen, and you should see 3 dots in the upper right-hand corner. If you click that, you should see rename. Okay, and if you need help, please let us know in the chat. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to ask that everybody remain on mute unless you have a question or a comment. And we'll definitely have time where we'll be taking those. And if you're on the phone, you're going to be dialing *6 to mute and unmute. Next slide. Okay, so to turn your video on, you're going to click the camera icon on the bottom left of your screen, and that will allow you to stop and start your video. Next slide. And this evening, we're going to be having sections where we're engaging in conversation around some topics. And so if you do have a question or a comment, we're going to ask that you use the raise hand function to let us know. So to do that, you're going to click on participants and then reactions and raise hand. So you should see like a little smiley face with a plus on it that says reactions. And you can click that. And that's what it'll look like when you raise your hand. And then you can lower your hand. Okay. And if you're on the phone, you can dial *9 and we'll check in periodically with anybody who's calling in. Next slide. Okay, so you can also provide comments and questions, or if you need help with any of the tech on Zoom in the chat, and you'll see the chat on the center bottom of your screen. You can choose private to chat with just a particular person, a host or a co-host. And you can also chat with each other as participants, but want to make you aware that we as hosts are able to see all of the chats at the end of the meeting. So while it might say private, it is not necessarily private, but you are able to chat with each other if you would like to do so. Okay, next slide. And at 2 points during this meeting tonight, we're going to be launching polls to get your feedback on a couple of topics. When a poll is launched, you'll see it pop up on your screen. And that's that image on the right, the box on the right that says Untitled Poll. You'll select your answers and then click Submit at the bottom right, that blue button when you're done. So please make sure to have your Zoom window large, because that way when the poll pops up, you'll be able to see the entire text. And we do have the poll questions in Spanish and English. So I want to make sure that everybody's able to see those in Spanish and English. So just make sure that your window is expanded. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we're going to go over the agenda. Before I do so, I do also want to let you know that we are simultaneously sharing the slides in Spanish and English. So if you would like to see the slides in Spanish, you can go to the top of your screen where it's showing that the meeting's being recorded. Click View Options. You'll see Shared Screens, and then you should see 2 options, English Presentation or Spanish presentation. So you can follow along with whichever presentation you prefer. Okay. So this is our agenda this evening. We're going to be covering the following topics. We're going to do some introductions with our community experts. Next, we'll be talking about contracts. We'll have a break. And then we're going to discuss how we'll be working together over the course of this project and the meeting principles for us as a group. We're going to be discussing how we'll approach decision making. And we can also discuss any changes or additions to the meeting principles that you may have as a group. Next, we're going to be covering the community engagement model, and that'll be an overview of the model. And you'll have a month to review this before we meet again. Then we're going to have another break, and we'll come back and have a community dialogue where we'll have a discussion on the locations of the community dialogue sessions and some ground truthing on those locations. And then we'll wrap up and cover any next steps. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. So we wanted to be able to show you guys where all of the community experts are from. So before we go into introductions with each community expert, we're going to highlight those diverse range of locations where all of you are from, which you can see here on this map. The goal of this contract was to really ensure that community experts represented a diverse range of the state of California. Next slide. All right, so at this point, we want to allow some time to get to know you, for you to get to know us, to introduce yourselves to each other, as we'll all be collaborating on this effort going forward. So I'm going to ask that we stop sharing slides so that we can all see each other. Great, thank you. And we would love to know whether you wish to do so in the chat or verbally, your name and pronouns, your organization, the community you represent, and our icebreaker question, which is, what brought you to this process? Why are you participating in this process? So we're going to go ahead and put those items in the chat. As a reminder, thank you. All right, and feel free to put your hand up and come off mute if you would like to respond verbally and introduce yourself, or feel free to put it in the chat, but we would love to get to know each of you. Hi, Heather, I see your hand up.
Hi, hi everyone. Good evening to all my Californians. I am Heather Zappia with the Making Hope Happen Foundation. There is a collective impact under that umbrella of the foundation called Uplift San Bernardino, and that is the city and where I'm at. And what brought me to this process was the work that I'm doing with my nonprofit. Besides the fact that San Bernardino City is my home, one of my values is to leave my home or leave things better than how I found it. So that is what I want to do with San Bernardino City. And we were a thriving, wonderful city. Route 66 was great coming through us, and we had a lot of we had a lot of things going for us. And then now things have changed, and I want it to come back to its former glory, if not better. I want it to be better than its former glory. So we're working together right now to get that going on.
Great, thank you so much. Gustavo, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
How's it going, everyone? Good evening. My name is Gustavo Aguirre Jr. I'm the Associate Director for Climate and Environmental Justice at the Central California Asthma Collaborative, or CCAC. Preferred pronouns he, him. I'm representing the Southern San Joaquin Valley. Although I'm based in Bakersfield, California, in Kern County, a lot of my work is throughout the San Joaquin Valley. And one thing that brought me to this process is, so for the last 10 years, I've been doing environmental justice work, particularly around, as you can see behind me, oil and gas and pesticide. advocacy, primarily working with farmer communities and rural communities. And so I see how our communities, like all the needs in our communities and what we oftentimes we find a lot of excuses, right? And really my path has to be here has been to find solutions in the community. And so a lot of community-based air monitoring, citizen science research work, and advocacy were really the drivers to join this group, and I'm so glad that I did. Thank you.
Thank you, Gustavo. Leonora?
Hey everybody, I'm Leonora Kamner. I use she, her pronouns. I am executive director of Abundant Housing LA. Although I do want to let everybody know that I'm actually transitioning out of that role with Abundant Housing, and I'm going to be doing climate resilience work starting next year. You know, in terms of like what community I'm representing, I think like Abundant Housing represents the pro-housing community, and you know, in a lot of different senses, but I don't really consider myself to be representing a community here. You know, what brought me to this process is you know, I obviously like CARB I think is really an important agency doing like really critical work related to climate and air quality, of course. And you know, I've been really excited by you know, the work that CARB is doing. So you know, I definitely was interested in being in this. And just like in terms of community engagement, I've become you know, I've become like very outspoken about the issues that I've seen with community engagement with like the housing advocacy work. So I guess like when I started doing housing advocacy, I had like a very positive view of community engagement. And then like over time seeing how that actually happened and just like the problems with like the typical community input process, I became like very outspoken and critical about that. So I've been trying to raise more awareness about those problems and better alternatives to community engagement. You know, like some of the issues that we've been seeing is just like a real lack of representation in community engagement and like kind of capture by you know, like interest groups and agendas. And then of course you know, there's you know, like there's studies that have been done showing how you know, those processes are not representative, and they're more likely to be older, whiter people, or like whiter communities that you know tend to be homeowners. So I do think like there are unintentional ways that community engagement is just sort of you know, making privilege more powerful in our systems. And so I'm very concerned about that, and I'm really excited to be here and a part of this conversation. So thank you so much for
Great.
including me. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Leonora. Thank you. Okay, we've got a few more hands. Lisa.
Good evening, everybody. I come from two different worlds. Before I started my career, I was a tree hugger, UFW activist as a child kind of thing. And then I decided to go to work for Caltrans, where I became both an environmental and a transportation planner. And one of the many things I did there was public engagement. So I can see both sides. But I will tell you, my tree hugging days have never been behind me. I used to be on the AB 617 committee here in Fresno. And what else you guys want to know? I have a ton of experience on policy stuff, and I'm already reading through this and going, yeah, that needs to change. So anyway, that's where I come, because I can talk to you guys about policy. I'm a policy wonk all the way within government, and can tell you everything about how they should be funding things and what they can actually do. So I think that's my bailiwick, and I'm sure it probably scares a couple of folks, but anyway, that's who I am. Oh, and I'm in Fresno.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lisa. And we really actually look forward to those recommendations and comments that you all have on the model. So not scary at all. All right. We've got a few more minutes to do some more introductions. Lillian.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Lillian Garcia with United for Justice. So we're a community-based organization, and we are kind of new, but I've been around since 2018. So I didn't really want to do an organization, but because a lot of state employees were like that, I was doing way too much work, and the only way to help the community and get funding and try and get ahead of the game was to do a 501c3. So I'm here. The community I'm representing is I usually advocate from the Board of Calexico all the way to the Coachella Valley, and it is Imperial County and Riverside County, and I focus mainly on the Salton Sea, the New River, the Alamo, like basically everything that has to do that the tributaries of the Salton Sea, water quality and air quality, pesticides, you name it. So I've done a lot of research and investigations from the New River, from the border all the way to the Coachella Valley. If anyone wants any information, I can forward you anything you guys would like to know about the area, as it does. I guess the receding of the Salton Sea it more likely is going to affect Southern California. So if there's anyone else on here from Southern California and the San Diego area, it's nice to be here in this space with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lillian. Violeta?
Y buenas tardes, mi nombre es Violeta Sandoval, estoy en el área de la Bahía, San Francisco. No estoy representando una organización específica, soy ella. Y algo que me llamó la atención para entrar acá es porque en mi trabajo siempre tenemos una de nuestras normas es promover la justicia alimenticia, y la justicia alimenticia tiene mucho que ver con el medio ambiente. Yo soy una persona que ama el reciclaje y me duele cómo está cambiando el clima, cómo estamos matando nosotros la tierra. Entonces, aquí yo sé que voy a aprender mucho, que puedo enseñar a la comunidad latina con la que trabajo para que hagamos cambios. Soy del pensar que con una persona pasa la voz y con dos podemos comenzar a hacer grandes cambios donde estemos. Gracias por la oportunidad.
Thank you, Aldo. I said thank you, Aldo, and thank you, Violeta. If any of you weren't able to hear Violeta's comments being translated into English, please make sure that you click interpretation and then the English channel, and then you'll be able to hear our wonderful interpreter, Aldo, as he translates those comments so that we can all hear and understand each other. All right, we have time for one more. Well, okay, let's do Jasmine and Emily, and then we're gonna move on. But if we have time left at the end of the meeting and folks feel like continuing to introduce themselves and getting to know each other, we can make use of that time if that is available. So Jasmine.
Hi, good afternoon. Well, nice to see you all finally. My name is Jasmine Beltran, and I'm affiliated with AB 617 Southeast Los Angeles. And I've been doing CSC meetings for like about since 2019, since they started in the area Southeast cities. And I also recently did a paper with CARB on catalytic converter thefts and prevention. I am also a neighborhood watch captain for the city of Southgate. I live in Huntington Park, and I have a business in Southgate, so that's why I'm back and forth all the time. So I'm happy to be here. The reason I got involved was that I want to have something to participate in something else. Environmental justice is like my number one thing, but the whole process of I guess engagement is is quite interesting, and I'm learning also along the way. So I'm here more for the learning and experience, and hopefully we could all work well together and get to the goals that we're aiming for. So nice to meet you all.
Great. Thank you, Jasmine. Lovely to meet you. Great, and we'll do Emily.
Hey everyone, I'll be quick. My name is Emily McCaig. I'm from Self Help Enterprises. We're a nonprofit housing and community development organization, and our mission is to build and sustain healthy homes and communities throughout the San Joaquin Valley. I'm based in the Hanford Visalia area, and I am mostly focused on access to water and water quality issues. So I just hope to, continue to represent our communities throughout the San Joaquin Valley, particularly our low income and rural communities, kind of expand on my experience with water quality to include air quality issues that affect our region very significantly. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thanks for being here, Emily. All right, thank you everybody who introduced themselves verbally and in the chat. If you haven't had an opportunity to do so yet, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. At this point, we are going to resume sharing our screens and continue on. Great, thank you. And again, if you'd like to see the Spanish slides, you can click View Options and choose the Spanish slides. Okay, so CARB is charged with protecting the public from the harmful effects of air pollution and also developing programs and actions to fight climate change. The Community Engagement Capacity Building Work Group is tasked with developing the community engagement model. So we don't have time to introduce the entire CARB team that has been working on the community engagement model. So the following slides will introduce the staff. The staff are cross-divisional throughout the agency. Photos of each member are included along with the division that they work within in CARB. So here on the first page, the staff includes Pablo, Aldo, Antonio, Samantha, Jonathan, Karina, Gretchen, Noemi, Wente, and Erica. Next slide, please. And here you can see continued that we have Deidre, Jose, Victoria, Joyce, Lana, Lisa, Lachey, and Amanda. All right, so please note that not all the staff members were able to attend the meeting this evening, but several are in attendance and are available to answer questions throughout this meeting. They may come off mute at times to answer questions that you have. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Jose to present on our next agenda item, which is the contract.
Thank you, Julia. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Really happy to have you all up here. So my name is Jose, and I will be also one of the presenters for today. So this opportunity to work with you, as you all know, we went through this contracting process, and so over the next few slides, I will be providing you with an overview of this contract and some important things for you to know. I'll start off by going over the contract terms. So essentially, as you'll know, I signed the paperwork, and this contract officially was executed and was supposed to start on September 1st of 2023. And is gonna run until April 30th of 2024. There's also a compensation that is up to $5,000 per contract. So, and as Julia mentioned and others have mentioned, is the purpose of setting up this contract is to work with you to help us grant through the community engagement model. And everyone here is, just so you know, all of you signed the same contract, and we all have, all of you also have the same tasks as well. Now that I briefly touched on the tasks, so there are six specific tasks that all of you are encouraged to complete as well. And so in the next slide, I will be covering a little bit more about those tasks. Also, as it has been mentioned, I'm one of the contract managers, and each of you here today has been assigned a contract manager. So your contract manager has been in communication with you, sending emails and sending the forms. Also, you will see the contract managers listed on this table here, along with all the community experts. And essentially, they are your go-to for any kinds of questions that you have related to this process, or any forms or anything as well. And one of the important forms that they have also submitted with they have shared with you is an invoice template that you will be utilizing to fill out and submit every time you complete a task. So that's just in a nutshell an overview of the contract. The next slide, please. As I mentioned, this contract is composed of 6 tasks. And so I will be walking you through this task. And the first one is this first virtual meeting that we're having with all of you, where we're discussing the contract itself and some of the administrative portions of it. We're also going to be touching a little bit more about the draft model that we have worked on. So that is essentially the first task. And so right after this meeting, you can fill out and submit your first invoice for successful completion of this task. Now, task number 2 is where you will be reviewing the draft model. So the next step for you will be to review the community engagement model and provide some comments on it. As Julia mentioned earlier, you will have approximately 4 weeks or a month from today to complete this task. And one of the things that we will do at the next time we meet, which is the third task here, is the second virtual meeting we're going to have, where we're going to be spending all of our time together to discuss in detail comments that you have or recommendations about the community engagement draft models. So in addition to that, between now and the next time we meet, which will be happening in November, you will be also providing at the end a brief summary with your written documents, with your written comments for any comments that you have throughout the community engagement model. Now, the fourth task is a third virtual meeting. And this meeting, we don't have a date yet, but it will happen sometime early in 2024. And after, also right after when we have this meeting, before we have this meeting, there's going to be a series of public meetings that we're also going to be talking about later on. But the goal is to have these public meetings first, and then come together and discuss comments that in detail, more comments that we hear from you and comments that we hear from the public, to incorporate it into our revised model, into our revised version of the model. Now, task number 5 here is kind of similar to task number 2, where we will be providing a revised model based on comments that we received from all of you in the public. And so you will have the opportunity to, again, up to a month or maybe more time to review the revised version and provide comments. And similar to what we're going to do in task number 2, or the second meeting, the last meeting, which is task number 6, that's when we're going to come together early in the spring, right before the end of the contract, so we can have our last discussion and meeting together to finalize comments and recommendations for this community engagement model. And just as just to briefly summarize, basically between now for our first meeting and over the next few months, we're just going to meet 4 times in total, and we're going to have time for you to review and provide recommendations on the community engagement model. Next slide, please. One slide before that. Oh, yeah, the next slide. There should be another slide. Oh, funny. I think we should be at slide 15.
I don't know. This is just the order of slides, so.
That is very strange. Is it the same thing? Is the same thing happening for you, Antonio? There's no slide 15.
That's 15 on my deck. So.
I can't see which one you're seeing. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I know, Antonio, you have the right slide. Sorry, I don't know what happened there. I'm just gonna talk over that. If also if you want to see that slide, the correct ones, Antonio is showing it. So if you want to switch to the Spanish presentation, you can do that. But I'm just gonna briefly share with you some of the expectations that we have as part of this contract. So we also want to highlight things that will help us maximize our time together. One of them is, as we have communicated, and it's also mentioned in the contract, the compensation is issued by task. So again, we encourage you to complete all 4 tasks, which I mentioned includes the 4 meetings and 2 review sessions over the next few months. We are also expecting for everyone to participate and attend in all the 4 meetings that we're going to have. So if someone misses, for example, a meeting, unfortunately, they can be compensated for that meeting. So that's one of the things that I just wanted to highlight. And we're also asking for everyone to have active participation during the 4 meetings. And basically what we mean by that is that you engage in our conversations and discussions and provide either verbal or written communication during our time together. So we will really appreciate that. And the last thing that I also wanted to highlight, so again, we have shared with you an invoice template that you will be completing after successfully completing each task. And so, yeah, so I will be mentioning more information on the invoice as well. But I do want to emphasize that, unfortunately, we do have a processing, a process to process invoice. It takes sometimes, it could take up to 45 business days for CARF to pay an invoice. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. It is a slow process sometimes, but you will definitely be getting paid. So don't worry about that. So if we can go to the next slide where we have the invoice template. Okay, so I think all of you have received this invoice template, and if you haven't opened it and this is the first time that you're looking at it, that's totally okay. Yeah, this is not the updated version. Anyways, but yeah, so we can, next slide. We'll just continue. Yes, so there are a set of instructions here. There are very basic instructions that you need to fill out. There's a lot of fields here or information that is already pre-filled, so you don't have to worry about that. But essentially, all you need to do, click next, please. In this section where it says from, under the contractor name, there's a drop-down list menu where you will be selecting your name. After you select your name, some of the other fields here will be automatically added, such as the contract number and your contract manager, along with their email as well. But in this section, after you select your name, the other thing that you need to do is type in your mailing address where it says mailing address. That's the other thing you need to do. Click next, please. Next. Next. And the last, can you click next? Okay, so under billing information, there will be another section where you will see a drop down menu where you basically will select task number 1, for example, for this meeting. And once you select task number 1, all the information about, like, for example, the billing cycle, the total amount due, will be automatically added to this form, as well as under the section where it says from, and it says invoice date, the invoice number will appear there. So we're keeping it very simple to invoice number 1 through 6, or task 1 through 6, just to match that as well. Do note that the invoice date it will automatically appear the date that you open that spreadsheet. So for example, if you were to open it today, you will see the 10/10 date as well. So after you select your name from the drop-down list menu, you type in your mailing address and select the task, you will have to go to the file portion of the spreadsheet, save it as an Adobe PDF, convert it to PDF. You will then save it and you will email it to the email that appears under the bill to section. So you will send it to accounts payable, and then you will be CCing Gina, and along with your contract manager, whose email you will see appear under the contract manager information. And again, if there are any questions or any troubleshooting related to the invoice, or you have any questions related to the contract itself, you are always encouraged to reach out to your contract manager for help. And with that, concludes my portion of providing this overview of the contracts, and I'll hand it over back to Julia, and this is the time we'll have an opportunity to ask questions or clarify any of the things that I went over or any things related to the contract.
Great. Thank you so much, Jose. Yes. So at this point, we are going to pause. And if you have any questions on the contract, the tasks, or the invoice process, please let us know. We have time now to go over any of those questions that you may have. Lisa, I see your hand up.
Yeah, real quick question, invoice number. Because I do actual consulting work on the side. So is that an invoice number that you guys are generating, or is it something I can do in-house for my bookkeeper?
Yes, that is a good question. We wanted to keep it simple, just I guess the example that I can give you and just provide it. I know some folks when they sign contracts, some of you community experts that sign the contracts, you sign it as an individual. So if you sign yourself as an individual, we'll prefer if you submit task 1 through 6. But for example, at least if you have your own process, feel free to just continue with that number.
I actually have already written, I actually independently already wrote up all the invoices because I used to do contract administration for Caltrans as well. So, but that's okay. I can use this form, not a big deal.
Great. Yeah. Yeah, whatever works for you. If it's easier to do it that way and continue your own numbering, that's fine. Just I'll let your contract manager know, which I think is
no, it's okay. I mean, because I was just going to put like October 2023. That's all. That's so I know where I'm at in the process. That's all.
Great. Yeah, and we also created this form, just to make it easier on all of you as well, so you don't have to.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Seriously, I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. Thanks, Jose. Lillian, I see your hand up.
Okay, hi everyone again. So can you guys just clarify? Right now she said it's the date, or is it task 1 that we put on the invoice? If it's an individual, we are doing an invoice every month, correct? And yeah, is that what we're doing?
No, Lillian, you're not submitting invoice every month. So you're basically submitting an invoice every time a task has been completed. So for example, this meeting is a task, so it's task number 1. So you can submit an invoice for this. And the next task will be the reviewing of the model. So we have about a month between now and mid-November. So that's another task, but it just happens to be that this month and the next one are kind of consecutive, but then, for example, the third time we meet is going to be until like next year. So you're going to submit that invoice. I don't know, I'm just giving you a month here, let's say February of next year.
Okay, so then that means that for November, we're going to do the draft model, and then until we don't have the meeting, then we submit the task, correct?
Yes, that is correct. So once it is completed, and we do have a tentative date for the next time we meet, which is November 14th.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and there was a question in the chat from Leonora. Is there a written version of these instructions? Yes, there are instructions included with the form. Okay, yes. And we also had a question. Can we drop the additional upcoming meeting dates into the chat? And thank you, Jonathan has put that in the chat. The next meeting date is November 14th from 5 to 8 p.m. The 3rd and 4th meetings have not yet been determined. Any other questions on the topic of contracts or the tasks or the invoice process? Can we go back a few slides to the slide that lists out each person's contract manager? Thank you. Okay, great. So if you have any other additional questions that come up in the next few days or in the interim until our second meeting, We have up on the screen right now, everybody's contract manager. All right, so unless there are any more questions or concerns, we're going to take a little break. Okay. All right, so we're going to take a 10-minute break. We will be back at 6 o'clock. Antonia, would you mind stop sharing for a second so that we can get the English slides up as the default? Great, thank you. Welcome back, everybody. All right. Hope everybody enjoyed their little break. We're gonna get started here. Just want to make sure we have Spanish slides and English slides up.
Do we have the English ones up yet?
We do. We have the English ones up.
Okay.
Okay, great. So we have the English and Spanish slides available again. All right, next slide, please. All right, so we're going to be talking a little bit about how we will all be working together over the course of these meetings. In order to work together as a group, we're going to be using a series of options. I also just want to preface this with myself as your facilitator in these meetings. It's my job to kind of make sure that we're addressing all the topics that we need to address in the time frame that we have. And so at times I may interrupt. I mean, no disrespect. If I do that, it's just to make sure that we can have time to talk about all the topics that are on the table for the day. And as we go through these three options, hopefully you'll see that we've really thought out having three options to gather feedback so that we make sure we don't miss anything and that there's always options to provide additional feedback. Okay, so the first way that we will gather feedback is through a survey. You have already encountered one of those when we were picking a time for today's meeting. So those will be surveys that we send out to you to gather information on meeting times, and it might be a follow-up survey that we send out after a meeting to follow up on a key question or topic that we discussed that we need more feedback on. The second way that we will work together is by using polls. So the polls will be more for kind of immediate and focused feedback. We're going to be running one of those later tonight in the meeting, so you'll get a chance to see how that works. And then the last way that we're going to be working together is the stoplight model poll. And this is for kind of broader conversational topics. So the way this will work is you'll see a poll that will launch and you'll have 4 choices. You'll select green if you approve the proposal, yellow if you have some reservations, but you can live with it, orange if you have something to say, suggest, or ask, and red if you feel like this really needs major discussion and we need to stop. So we'll be using that stoplight poll method for those broader conversational topics. And also just want to say, even if you select green or yellow, we also want to know why you agree. So it's just as important to know kind of why you agree, why you think something works, as it is to know why something doesn't work, and a suggestion for an alternative or something that might be a better approach. So we'll definitely be making space for those kinds of conversations. Okay. All right. So we also want to note here that you are an expert. You are the expert in these processes. And we're going to be working to incorporate your comments. And we will be noting areas of disagreement and contentions, and we'll allow for time for those discussions. We're also going to be tracking all of the comments, questions, and suggestions during this process in the chat, verbally, in those polls and surveys. So we will be recording everything. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to stop here. Do any of you have any questions on those 3 methods of how we're going to be working together? And can we go back to that slide just so we have it up? Great, thank you. Any questions on these 3 methods, surveys, polls, and the stoplight method? Okay. I don't see any hands up, so we'll keep moving on. And we're going to have a chance to test out the polls and the stoplight method tonight. All right, next slide, please. Okay. So we're going to talk about meeting core principles for us as a group. We want to build with all of you a space where everybody feels welcome and comfortable. And it's important that we discuss and add on to the list of core meeting principles if you believe that we should do so. So the current list.
Put them down in here.
Of,
I'll put the receipt in there.
oh, okay. All right. So the current list of core principles are as follows. We would request that everybody participate fully, and that can be verbally or in the chat, in the surveys. We definitely want to know what you think. We also want focus on the agenda and the agenda topics. Also want to be keeping equity central. And that's kind of twofold. We want to be keeping equity central in terms of how we engage with each other as a group, and also equity central in terms of your reflections and feedback and comments on the model itself. And also we're going to assume that all ideas and points of view have value, excuse me. So you should have received this information in advance of the meeting, along with more details about what we mean with these principles. So at this point, we want to stop and have a discussion. And we'd like to know, are you supportive of the current list of meeting core principles? Are there any others that you think should be there that are not there, that are necessary for us to be working together as a group? Please feel free to raise your hand or put a comment in the chat.
Okay.
All right, so I see a comment in the chat, very supportive. Something about efficiency. Oh, Gustavo, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. At this point, are we using like the stoplight method to vote? And if so, how will we type out like green, yellow, red, orange?
Yes, so we're going to test out the stoplight poll after we've discussed it a little bit as a group. And maybe there are things that everybody thinks that we should add. And then once we have kind of an idea of what that list looks like, then we'll vote with the stoplight method. But yep, absolutely, Gustavo. Okay. So I'm going to check on the chat here. I see support for the list as is. Maria is offering, in addition to make space and take space. So to make space, Maria, if you want to speak to that a little bit, what you mean by make space and take space?
It's just a principle, so we are all encouraged to participate. And if we are very eager to participate, just be mindful that, you know, we're roomful people and we should make space for others to participate as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I see a comment as well in the chat from S-Space, something about efficiency. So thank you for that comment. I think, and please feel free to come off mute. I think we can wrap that into focusing on the agenda, staying focused on the agenda. But please feel free to come off mute and explain if you think that needs to be kind of a separate item on these core principles.
No, I think that just as long as I guess we understand that that's what that means in terms of focusing on the agenda, that it means in terms of the efficiency part of it, just because our time is limited, right? As far as like, you know, our input and our time together. And that's all. So yeah, if that's the part of it, I guess then I guess further explanation on the different components. And I don't know if you're going into that next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we can definitely add that to the materials that you received that kind of explained each of these core principles. I think it's appropriate to add, you know, that by focusing on the agenda, what's included in that is being efficient, respectful of our time together, and mindful that it is limited. Thank you, Espe. Okay, so going through the chat here, Jasmine, I see a comment. Keeping language and conversations real, but not to be offended by views. So Jasmine, feel free to come off of mute if you'd like to explain that suggestion a little more. It seems like we could wrap that into our core principle of all ideas and points of view have value. But what are your thoughts on that?
Oh my God. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm
No
putting gas
problem.
right now. I'm at the gas station. About my comment that I put that we shouldn't take the views of others to be in any way like offensive to our own understanding, or to feel the anger or animosity towards the differences, or to find it like an excuse to have anger or animosity towards anything or anybody just because they're different. With different views is sort of what I'm getting at.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we can, like we did earlier with Espe's comment, I think we can kind of wrap that into a more robust explanation of assuming good intent and that all
Okay.
ideas and points of view have value. Does that sound correct to you?
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect.
Okay, great. Anitha, please correct me if I mispronounced your name. There's a comment here. How will we allow adequate time for discussion given the number of participants and the limited time? So I think our core principle that addresses that is staying focused on the agenda. But please feel free to come off mute if you'd like to explain that suggestion.
Well, I was wondering if there were going to be breakout rooms or some sort of way to filter down on some of these topics when we get into detail. Otherwise, you will probably lose a lot of the comments or I don't know other tools that you might think of, but in designing our communication flow.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So myself and the CARB team work weeks in advance of these meetings to really think out how to structure the time. Breakout groups are a great suggestion. And so we definitely, create an agenda, allow time for those conversations. And then, as I mentioned earlier, having those follow-up surveys to make sure that, if we have a conversation in one of these meetings and you sit on an issue, but you'd like to provide additional feedback or you need time to process before providing additional feedback, we make space for that and provide those surveys to make sure that we're getting all of that feedback. Lisa, I see your hand up.
I tend to get long-winded, so I would appreciate a bullet point of the best way to shut me down, or not, I won't say shut me down, but to refocus is all you really have to say is, what about those Mets? I don't follow sports. It is my way to like get off the top. What about the Mets tells me that, yeah.
All right, I am making a note of that, Lisa, because if I do need to jump in with you, that is what I will use.
What about those Mets?
What about those Mets? Okay. All right. Just scrolling through, making sure we see all of the comments in the chat. We have a comment from Richard. Not sure if it applies to these principles, but what about agree to disagree? Again, Richard, feel free to come off chat. I think we can wrap that in again to a more robust explanation of, giving people the benefit of the doubt, assuming good intent, and that all idea and points have value.
We can indeed, but I also want to love Lisa's what about those Mets when it gets to those conversations. I love that, Lisa. Thank you for that.
All right, Richard. Thank you. Maybe that'll just be my go-to now. when I have to jump in.
Or you add it to the stoplight one. You know, you got the green, the yellow, the amber, the red, and what about those Mets?
What about the Met? All right. We have a comment from Catalina. What is the process for developing the agenda? Do community experts have an opportunity to propose agenda items? That's a great question. And I see one of our CARB staff members, Lana.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think, as you know, as was kind of laid out in the contract process that Jose mentioned, we do have some specific topics we have to cover in our various meetings. But that being said, we also want to have a lot of time, especially in those future meetings, for breakout discussions and focused discussions. So we do plan to have that. And then I think, especially as you're reviewing the model, and if there are specific topics you're interested in talking about, we can definitely consider those. So please let us know about those. So I just wanted to kind of help answer that question. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Lana. So maybe that's some feedback that we can incorporate into the preparation process going into future meetings. Jose, I see your hand up.
Yes, on that note, I just going back to what I mentioned about your contract managers being your go-to. So if there are any suggestions, things like this, always reach out to your contract manager. That will be the best way for us to get your thoughts and suggestions for future topics, for agendas, and all of that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jose. All right, so I don't see any other comments or questions. So we're going to test out the stoplight poll method on this issue. Now, that being said, I'm going to have you react using the stoplight poll method to those nuanced changes that we made as a result of your comments. So we had comments to kind of add more robust explanations to what it means to focus on the agenda, that includes an idea of efficiency, keeping an assumption of good intent, and that all ideas and points of view have value. Elaborating a bit more on that in terms of not being offended by other people's views and agreeing to disagree. All right, so at this point, we are going to run the stoplight poll to get your reactions. Do you agree with these core principles as we've kind of added to them? Then we can test out this function that we'll be using in future meetings. So you should see the poll launched. And make sure again that you kind of drag, you can't see all the questions, especially if you're a Spanish speaking participant. Make sure to drag the bottom right of the square so that you can see all of it, because we have the Spanish and English text in there. Are you supportive of the current list? Yep, go ahead.
I also put the question in the chat.
Great, thank you, Joyce. All right. So I'm going to wait until we get to 20. You guys are doing this fast. Great. Okay, and looks like we have about 5 folks who haven't responded yet. If you're having any problem with the poll, in this instance and in future meetings, feel free to put your responses in the chat. So we always have that as a additional option for how you can give feedback on this poll. If for whatever reason it's not working, the chat is always open. All right, so it looks like we're just missing one person, but I think they might have maybe dropped out of the meeting and might need to log back on. So in the chat. Green the Church, I see your comments in the chat. Can you elaborate on that? Is there an issue with the chat or the poll? Ambrose. Thank you. Yes. So you're not seeing the poll. Okay, so we do see you in the chat. So you would be able to scroll up and you can see that Joyce put the poll. Joyce put the poll in the chat. And you can just go ahead and put your response right there in the chat. Do you agree? Green, yellow, orange, or red? All right, so we can go ahead and end the poll and share results. All right, so it looks like 19 of you agreed, and one of you had reservations, but you can live with it. And thank you, Ambrose. We have another I agree. All right, so this is what the stoplight method is going to look like. There might be times where we stop and have a discussion before we run the poll, and then vote on kind of that more robust post-conversation option. Or we run the poll at the beginning, and then we use this to indicate, okay, we're going to take the temperature. What's everybody's feeling on this issue? Do we need to stop and discuss? All right, so we can stop sharing the poll. And next slide, please. Can we move to the next slide, please? Great. All right, so any questions on what we just did, that kind of test run of the stoplight method? Okay. And thank you, Ambrose, for letting us know that that wasn't working. That's perfect. Let us know in the chat. Okay, Jasmine, welcome back. I just want to check with you. Were you able to test out using the poll function? And do you have any questions or concerns? No. Okay. All right. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the community expert meetings. Again, another reminder that ahead of this meeting, you guys all came to a unanimous decision to allow all 4 meetings to be recorded and posted to the CARB Community Engagement Model webpage so that the public can have an opportunity to listen in and provide comments. And we'll also be posting information about each community expert on the website, which was also supported in the survey. Next slide, please. Okay. So we wanted to pause here and see if you had any questions about posting the meeting recordings and information on community experts to the website. And you can feel free to put any questions or comments in the chat or raise your hand. Richard.
As we go forward with this over the next months and we have the recordings, what will we be allowed to share with community about the process and the progresses we are making?
Great question. I'm going to see if any of our CARB staff feel prepared to answer that question. So what are community experts able to share as they go through this process with the community? Oh, thanks, Jose.
I'll jump in here and my other colleagues can add on more. So that's a really good question, Richard. So officially this process, all this process is public, and some of the slides later on, we're going to be talking about the community dialogue. So we're going to have an opportunity as well to host public meetings to make this as open as possible to the general public. So I guess my short answer will be, you're welcome to share anything, really. We are really looking forward to get participation and comments, not only from you as community experts on a one-to-one kind of basis through this space, but also we want to engage the broader public in general and the communities as well. So, and anything you can help us, have a broader reach will be really, really helpful for all of us.
Thank you for that answer.
Great, thank you, Jose. Lisa, I see your hand up.
Yeah, coming from my former iteration as a former state worker with the Department of Transportation, this draft dated June 15th, you wouldn't mind us sharing with it, or is this a draft before the official draft comes out? Because I feel kind of skittish about sharing this draft that we're reviewing before it's finalized draft, the first edition, you know, for the public.
Yeah, definitely appreciate that concern, Lisa. Any CARB members feel prepared to answer that? Is it okay for community experts to share the draft of the draft?
This is a living document and we want folks to tear it up, right? This is just our first initial thoughts on paper. And so feel free to share. We expect it to change a lot, right? We're leaving our sort of egos aside as we go through this process. We put a lot of work into it, but we're also expecting it to change. So please share. Thank you.
Great,
Yeah,
thank you, Lachey.
And just to quickly jump in, I will also say I think we're going to be sending you a revised model very quickly. We realized the version that we sent out didn't include some additions from our tribal liaison here at CARB, who provided some really great additions. So we will be providing that after this meeting. So I would say share that version that we're going to be sending to you very shortly.
Could you? One of the things I noticed on it is not all the pages have page numbers. Is there any way you can get page numbers on every single page?
Yeah, we can work on putting page numbers on it. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Lisa. So it sounds like, yes, you guys can share the draft model. That's encouraged. It's part of the ground truthing process, with the caveat that folks know that it's a living document. It will be changed. There are going to be multiple iterations of this draft as we go forward and change it based on your feedback. Anita, I see your hand up.
Yes, I probably have not read the document in sufficient detail and I'm skipping over it, possibly. But the initial framework of this document, I don't see any references, and there are many models of community engagement that, you know, are floating around here and there. So was there a starting point for this particular document, the template that we're looking at, or the draft that we're looking at?
Oh, that's a great question. So I know that CARB has spent a lot of time getting this document, this draft put together. So if there's someone that feels comfortable giving kind of a little breakdown of how you guys arrived at the draft that community experts have seen.
Sorry, I can take a stab at this. Sorry, I'm parenting. That's why it's taking me a bit to come on. Thank you for allowing me to be a little human. So the model came about in a couple of ways. One, there were some CARB staff and a staff person at CNRA, the Natural Resources, California Natural Resources, who put a first draft together. And then we, as a collective group with all of our different backgrounds, heavily edited the model. The model also went through several reviews with CARB's legal team and upper management. And then that's what you see before you today. Am I missing anything? Feel free to add on, folks.
Yeah, I think we also looked at, you know, other versions of other models that are out there, like the Government Alliance of Race and Equity and others that were kind of all incorporated into the model that you have.
Okay. That's great, because I know they're working with our AB 617 team down here in Eastern Coachella Valley. I was on the outreach team. It was a teeny tiny team that has dwindled through the years, and that's one of the things that I did, was to look at all the various models out there and try and synthesize something. And I think before we get into, for me in particular, before we get into the weeds of this paragraph, that paragraph here, or any of the details of the the weeds of the matter. I think it's kind of helpful to have a big sense of, for this particular engagement model, what are the must-haves. So, we have a focus here on environmental justice, and so on, because there's so many ways that you could go. We could be focusing on homelessness, we could be focusing on environmental justice, we could be focusing on economic justice. I mean, what are well, we assume it's environmental because it's CARB, but what are did they delineate some, or do we just look at the key principles? What are the must-haves for this particular model? Is there any consensus on that as you were developing this?
That's a great question. I'm going to look to the CARB staff if they feel comfortable, but it also sounds like that might be something that we arrive at together as a group through this process.
Right.
That seems like something that would be perfectly suited to your feedback, community expert feedback.
Right. Yeah, I would think we would want to kind of, because we could be going in many, many, many directions. To me, it just doesn't, what are we aiming at in particular? Because if I'm focusing on homelessness, I'm going to go one way. If I'm focusing on environmental justice, I'm going to go another way. If I'm focusing on health impacts, mainly, maybe maybe there's overlap between all of those. It's a nice little Venn diagram, but it kind of helps to know. So
yeah, absolutely.
I would just suggest that maybe I can formalize that suggestion a little bit better after going through it. So I'll take that on.
Great, thank you. And also our Deidre has her hand up and may have something to add there.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, we have flexibility. We are with CARB, so we can't address everything. So homelessness is not in our remit, unfortunately. And our main concerns at CARB are really around air quality, climate mitigation, protecting public health. And of course, this group and CARB more broadly is extremely focused on environmental justice and racial equity. So I think within those Venn diagrams, those would be kind of where we're aiming towards, but we understand that even those touch on a lot of different topics. And anybody else at CARB, please feel free to jump in, but I would say that more so than some of the other things that you were mentioning.
I also wanted to jump in. Oh, sorry, Anita, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I just also want to jump in and say the focus of the community engagement model itself is showing CARB staff how we put communities first and partner with communities. So that's also a really main focus, working with communities to work on those issues that Deidre had mentioned. So I think that's the primary focus, and then the protecting public health comes with it too.
Great, thank you, Joyce. And Anita, and yes, thank you. Thanks for your comment and suggestion. I think some of the kind of topic there might be illuminated a little bit by our next presentation, where we're going to be going over kind of the model itself. But I do just want to read out a comment that we had in the chat for our Spanish-speaking participant. So Jasmine mentioned, when it comes to ground truthing, are we going to do this on our own community? As in, will we be able to have meetings and test the model? And the response there is that it's not required by the contract, but people are welcome to discuss in their communities. And we're also going to speak later tonight about where we will be hosting those meetings. And Catalina, thank you for your comments. You agree with Anita, it would be helpful to have a sense of what steps have been taken so far to get to this point of the current draft. All right. Thank you all very much for your thoughtful questions and comments. We're going to move on to an overview of the community engagement model, and I'm going to hand it over to Lana to present the model.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Lana Wong. It's nice to be here with you tonight, and I'm happy to already hear questions coming in about the model itself. So I'm one of the staff that worked on the community engagement model, and today I'm going to go over kind of the motivation for developing the model and its current components. Next slide. So while CARB values the involvement and engagement of community stakeholders, we also want to acknowledge that our engagement efforts have not always been robust or consistent across the agency. And the community engagement model will provide CARB with a process informed by community expertise to engage and build relationships that help shape our projects, programs, policies, and regulations. The community engagement model will bolster an engagement process that actively provides opportunities for communities to take part in the conversation, learn, and work more collaboratively with agency staff beyond providing input. The goal of these collaborations is to ensure that CARB's impact increasingly leads to more equitable, especially racial outcomes for all Californians. And CARB staff have been requesting support for equitable community engagement to integrate into their work. And so as a result, we are developing this agency-wide community engagement model to train and equip staff with the tools, knowledge, and confidence to expertly engage with communities. And we want the model to reflect community needs, which is why we are collaborating with all of you. And we'll also be hosting a series of public meetings, which we are calling community dialogue sessions, to ensure our community engagement model provides staff the tools to reach out to hard-to-reach communities. So over this process, we want to evaluate and evolve the draft community engagement model based on feedback to best meet staff and stakeholder needs. Next slide. So over the next few slides, I will present on what is currently in the draft engagement model. But again, I want to be clear that we want to evolve this model and refine it together, both as part of the ground truthing process and as part of these meetings. So currently, the draft engagement model includes 4 parts. The first part of the model is the narrative, which provides historical context as to why the community engagement model is being developed and background and why community engagement is essential to our work. Next slide. The second part of the model is the plan template. It provides CARB staff with guidance and questions to consider when planning for community engagement as part of a project, program, policy, and regulation. It helps staff set clear goals and objectives and develop flexible near and long-term community engagement efforts for communities with diverse needs. And next slide. The draft community engagement model includes a series of steps to assist staff on how to approach community engagement efforts. The plan template currently consists of 10 steps to help staff plan their approach to community engagement. The first step offers guidance on how to develop goals and objectives and how community engagement can address these. The second step focuses on identifying the stakeholders. This includes who will be impacted by an action, who can contribute to the conversation, and understanding of the history and who has been involved in the past. The third step focuses on identifying where your effort falls on an engagement spectrum and how your engagement could be strengthened. The fourth step focuses on examining racial and social equity, and this includes considerations of data, both quantitative and qualitative, what equity metrics we will be using to understand impacts, and strategies that can be used to advance racial equity. The fifth step focuses on examining other important considerations such as political, socio-political, legal, and resource needs. And next slide, please. The sixth step offers guidance on how to establish a timeline and identify major milestones. The seventh step focuses on the selection of how staff will approach community engagement, and this includes examples of activities and strategies for informing, educating, consulting, and collaborating with stakeholders. The eighth step focuses on ensuring language access through translation, interpretation, ADA accessibility, and using plain language. The ninth step focuses on exploring logistical needs by understanding what staff needs for engagement activities. And the 10th step focuses on ground truthing the engagement plan through an informal process design check. Next slide, please. So the third part of the draft community engagement model is the implement template, which focuses on implementing outreach and engagement activities and strategies that were identified in the plan template. This template offers practical resources for how to leverage community stakeholder relationships to promote engagement activities as they relate to a CARB action, and guidance on how to acquire things like translation and interpretation. And next slide. The implement template currently consists of 4 steps. The first step focuses on refining the engagement activities that were identified in the plan template. The second step offers guidance on how to identify and implement communication methods. This essentially entails how staff plan to advertise and publicize engagement activities. The third step focuses on detailed topics to consider prior, during, and after your event, including logistical considerations such as dates and times, as well as how to create a space where community stakeholders feel comfortable sharing and participating. And the fourth step focuses on adjusting the community engagement activities. So it's important to evaluate each activity after they're completed to really understand what processes worked well and which can be improved. And next slide. So the final step of the community engagement model is the close template. It provides CARB staff with guidance on closing the loop with stakeholders by informing them on how their feedback was considered and influenced the CARB actions they were engaged on, as well as any potential next steps. It also is used to help inform improvements to future internal and external community engagement efforts. And next slide. The closed template currently consists of 3 steps. The first step is public follow-up. So we recognize we need to continue to encourage stakeholder participation and acknowledge and thank them for their involvement. And so some examples of this are certificates of participation and acknowledgement in CARB prepared reports and documentation, as well as presenting community stakeholders with an action summary table outlining all the feedback that we've gathered, as well as how it was incorporated, and annotating and justifying any comments that were not included and why. The second step is assessing the effectiveness of our stakeholder engagement. This will be done through the use of surveys, both internal and external. A designated point of contact will administer and collect the survey results from the internal and external stakeholders at the end of the engagement process. And this will be used to inform the third step, which is to have recommended improvements to our engagement processes. So the surveys that will be used will provide recommendations both to our processes internally and externally. And these recommendations will be presented to our upper management, our Office of Environmental Justice, Tribal Affairs and Border Relations, as well as equity work groups across the agency. So that wraps up the high-level summary of the model. And as we talked about, the next task for you under the contract is to review it and provide comments and feedback on it, and we'll have future meetings to discuss it. Next slide. We also wanted to talk about 4 important components of the process. So the first is how we envision kind of working together on getting recommendations on the model. So as Jose described earlier in the contract and the task slides, we do expect verbal and written comments on the model, as well as comments during the virtual meetings. And then we would like comments on the entire model, as well as we have identified specific questions that we would like your help answering. We will also use our close the loop template, and we'll track comments and respond to them, as well as incorporate feedback into the model. And we also recognize that we may get comments that fall outside of our community engagement model. And we want to show that we welcome those comments and we will note them, and we will also pass them along to any respective programs. And we will also incorporate those comments into a separate tracking document. So with that, I'll pass it back to Julia.
Great, thank you, Lana. All right, so we want to pause here to see if you have any questions on the draft community engagement model and next steps. So we've got about 15 minutes to go through. Any questions? Richard.
Thank you. I just want to make sure for myself, especially, that what we are aiming for here in this particular group is strictly related to the community engagement model, not necessarily, and you know, I'll use something that's going on in Sacramento, for example, an issue that we are having related to equitable electrification of landscape or small landscaping businesses. We're not talking about any specific issues that are affecting our regions or our communities. This discussion is strictly around the community engagement model so that we can develop a model that will be effective and efficient going forward as any of those future issues come up. Am I right in assuming that?
Yes, that's correct. So we're really focusing on this model. As I said, you know, if as part of this process, you know, you want to give examples from your experiences, you know, you definitely should do that. I think we want to, you know, take this as part of like ground truthing and making the model as usable as possible as well.
And the only reason why I ask, and you know, forgive me, I remember sitting in a CARB meeting, had to have been 9 months ago, maybe longer, when there was the discussions around the new community engagement cycle, as you demonstrated here, as far as the planning, implement the close and such on that. And this is just me speaking based on what I experienced in that meeting. And that is a general feeling from the community at that time. And that was a very large meeting with, had to be 90 different people from around the region in California, especially. Because one of the things that rang out of that meeting was, what good is community engagement if the answers are always no? So there was, at that time, a general sense that there's a lot of community engagement, but the actual policies or changes towards the issues that are out there for each of our communities are still the parts that are in question for a lot of us. And I say that really not as a place to grow any kind of long-term discussion, but really as to say that, as I can tell you for me personally, as I go back to the community, and especially to discuss the fact that, you know, what their thoughts are of this process we are going through, of the goals and objectives we are going through, making sure that I'm level setting that this is around community engagement itself. I can tell you some of the first things that are going to come out of the people that I speak to is going to be, but we're still trying to fight for this, and we're still trying to fight for this, and you're bringing forward a community engagement model. So I guess I want to just put that out there so that it is uplifted from the community. But I did come into this knowing full well that right now this is our focus, and I will be an active participant in that, because I do believe how we engage community and the methods we use to engage community to make sure that we are bringing forward the community-driven mitigation strategies for all the things that we were talking about do definitely come in a fashion that will later on be listened to. And I'll get off a soapbox now.
All right, thank you. No, thank you so much, Richard. That's really good to have kind of a broader context for the work that we're doing. Ritika.
First of all, I'd like to thank Richard for the point that he made. Thank you, Richard, for your well thought out words. And I want to acknowledge that we all need to change, right? The policies that we were having in the past need to change. And that's why we are here asking for help from community to help us figure out the best way going forward. So definitely what we're going to learn out of this exercise, that's what we're going to implement within CARB, and that's going to help us move forward. Definitely. So I appreciate your comments, and I look forward to working with you all experts on this regard and making sure that, the output that comes in is not just CARB, it is a partnership. It comes from the community itself. So we know how to proceed further and get better and learn. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Lisa, I see your hand up.
I want to piggyback on a couple of things from Richard. As I'm listening to this, one of the things I heard was, you make a comment, we're going to give you like a certificate of appreciation. Community does not want that. Community wants to be seen, heard, listened to, engaged, and push the change. Because you can give them a certificate of appreciation, but because there's a political component about this that sometimes will override a community, you can give them a certificate of appreciation, but their air quality is going to suck. So, you have to look at the balance. I look at your policy from a perspective, and I don't know if I'm naive or not, but I'm looking at, you guys want to move from the bare minimum policy position of your department to actually something more engaging the community and providing a social change for the community. Am I wrong?
Thank you for your comment, Lisa, and for drawing specific attention. Go ahead.
One other thing also too, when the community gives you comments for any sort of meeting, there should be a meeting report that is open to any member of the public so they can come back and take a look at it, so they can see what were the other comments. And if there's a pattern of comments that are provided to CARB that have their same position and the position of CARB doesn't move toward community, then CARB has to address why those actions weren't taken, why those community recommendations weren't taken. And you need to kind of justify your position. That's what I think.
Lisa, thank you so much for those comments. I will say, I think on the closed template, one of the pieces is that kind of response to the comments that were received, and then explaining why or why not they weren't included. So I think that's there, but I think we can improve it. So I definitely look forward to that. And I will say, I think on the certificates, we had heard that some stakeholders like those, but we definitely want to hear more feedback on that in particular as well. So thank you so much for those comments.
Great, thank you, Lana and Lisa, for drawing specific attention to those two aspects of the model. Do we have any other comments, questions about the draft community engagement model and next steps? And you do see some support for that idea, Lisa's idea of really having minutes that record what the community is saying, from Maria in the chat. Thank you.
I just wanted to note that I added a response to Catalina in the comment section, and for folks who were curious about what were the different components that went into the model, note that it's in the chat now.
Great, thanks, Lachey. Okay, we have a question in the chat from Maria. There's no follow-up for public meetings, is there? I've attended a couple of CARB meetings and there was no follow-up. Is anybody from the CARB team able to speak to that? What kind of follow-up with community after public meetings is incorporated in this model? And Maria, maybe you can speak a little bit more also to what you see being included in follow-up. What does following up with the community look like to you?
What I mean by this is, for example, when CARB is having public meetings, normally when I've attended in person, you go to the meeting, there's a round of questions and answers, but there is no record of what happened in the meeting afterwards. At least that's what I've experienced in the past. So I attended a public meeting, and if for some reason I attended late or had to leave a little bit early, I have no record of what happened during that time. And if I wasn't able to attend, then I don't know what happened in the meeting. So I'm not sure if there's like a minute record somewhere in the website, but I haven't been able to find that in the past.
Okay, great. Thanks for clarifying. Any CARB members?
Yes, I'll respond.
Hey,
So thank you,
Jonathan.
Maria. I mean, you're absolutely right. CARB has not done a great job with follow-up in the past. Still isn't always doing a great job with that. And so that's what we're trying to improve on. And that's why maybe we really need to focus on that close part of the model so that we can make sure that, any sort of feedback and follow-up to a meeting that you all do want to hear about, we make sure that's in the model so that when CARB does future work, that is incorporated into everything we do.
Great, thanks, Jonathan, and thanks, Maria. Catalina, I see your hand up.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to thank Lachey for providing that information. And just wanted to say, I think it would be helpful. I was just responding to her in the chat, but I think it would be helpful to include this information in the document itself, just so that background is accessible to folks. And I also had a question about, in the comment, there was a mention of the community engagement and capacity building work group that previously contributed recommendations. I'm just curious, like, if this is still an active group, or
Yeah,
like
good
who this
question.
group
We're on the
was?
call.
Okay.
You're talking to that group.
Okay, great. So it's like a staff group.
Mhm.
Okay,
But
great.
noted that you want to see this in the model.
Yeah, and I think identifying those folks who are in the work group would be helpful. So yeah, that was just the response to the comment. Yeah, but I also had another thought about, it seems like the model is designed to be a tool for staff, to guide staff and to train staff. I'm just curious if like that is kind of like the limit of this tool, or if there was any thought on like, if there's any thought of like this being a tool for communities as well. I think a lot of communities have had a lot of challenges, like understanding the structure of CARB and understanding like, what divisions to approach, or, which staff to connect with. So just curious of like, is the goal of this group to just provide input on a tool that's intended for staff? Or has there been any thought on like, is this a tool for communities? Is there any like, is there any product that will be, help serve intended for communities to be able to navigate and provide their input more effectively at CARB?
Great, thank you for that question. I'm going to look to our CARB staff to see if anybody has a response to that. I know that it is a tool for CARB staff to use internally as a community engagement model, but it sounds like the question is there going to be some part of that tool or some incorporation in the model that provides a benefit to the community in terms of how to navigate CARB as an agency, maybe some tools that the community can use as well?
I appreciate that question. I think that the way that we have set out the model, that's not what it is doing. However, I think in order to do what you're saying, which is needed, we need to make a concerted effort to do it. So this model is not doing that currently, but I think we can take back as a group and think about like, how can we do this more effectively for communities? Because what you're asking for, I wouldn't want to do that poorly. And the model doesn't do it well because that wasn't how we developed it, if that makes sense. I don't know if anybody else at CARB wants to add to that.
Yeah, I think just to add, I think it needs to do both, right? Because we do, as I laid out in the presentation, we do need a staff tool, but we also need to make sure that it's working for communities as well.
Great. All right, so Anita, you've had your hand up, so we're going to take one more comment and question and then a break before we move on to our next topic.
Yes, thank you. I think the overview was very helpful in sort of, for me, I have to start with big picture before I can do small. I see all the many questions throughout, and those are, to me, the details. But, you know, the basic question, of course, that we always answer when we start tasks this large is, where are we now? Where are we going to? And how do we get there? And on the where are we now, I would be very interested because we're all on the line. Everyone has their different experiences doing outreach for the most part. You know, what has worked, what hasn't worked, which is the where are we now? I would be interested to hear the answers from other folks because, you know, it's a waste of a lot of resources if we don't know what other folks have experienced. And where are we going to? What would be the ideal, you know, fix? You know, like some of the questions that have been asked or raised, and then this model can provide the how do we get there. You know, it will help us to see, is a model really doing that, as opposed to just honing down on one definitional question, you know, and missing the big picture. You might end up with a lot of little answers, but in the end, where does it get you? You know, so I again, you know, sorry to keep going back to the same issue of where is our big picture? Where are we now? What is our ideal for community engagement? And, you know, this model that's the whole purpose of the model, to ensure that we arrive there. But I think until we have those two questions answered, the fundamental of where are we now, what doesn't work, what does work, you know, I think going to definitions, you know, where is that getting us where we need to go? I don't know. So, and my perspective is going to be different. We have a lot of folks online, so you know, I can just answer it from my perspective alone if you want to do that, but I don't know if that's what you want. I mean, I can do that. So, okay.
Yeah, no, thank you, Anita. That's a great suggestion, and it sounds like something that we might want to ask of everybody in a future meeting. Deidre, I see your hand up.
Yeah, we were just saying that, one, it would be really great if people keep those questions in mind as they're reading through the model over the next month. And that two, we can figure out a way to incorporate that into the agenda for the second meeting that we're having with you all, so that we're starting from those foundation questions that you're suggesting. So I don't think we have time or that folks are ready to maybe dive into that tonight, but definitely for sure, we'll put it on the agenda for meeting two.
Great, thank you, Deidre and Anita. All right, so we're going to take a little break at this point. We're going to come back at 8:10 to go over our next topic, which is community dialogues. So take a quick break and we'll be back at, sorry, 7:10. 7:10. All right, welcome back, everyone. Hope everybody got a chance to stretch their legs and get some movements. I know we've been sitting for a while, really appreciative of everybody's time. We are going to continue with our next presentation on those community dialogue meetings, and I'll hand it over to Jose.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, everyone. Welcome back. I really appreciate all those great questions and comments. I think that's really helpful for all of us to think about as we take some next steps. So one of the other things and big parts of only now working with you in the community engagement model is also the in-person and virtual meetings we will be hosting. And as it has already been mentioned, we're calling these public meetings community dialogue sessions. And the goal with hosting these community dialogue sessions is to open up the process to the public to get also their comments and recommendations to help us improve the model. We plan to do this and to host these community dialogue sessions before, again, as I mentioned earlier, before we have our third meeting. So these dialogue sessions will likely happen over the next few months, just maybe starting earlier, before the end of the year and until the early of the 2024. We are considering up to 7 in-person meetings in different parts of the state. And we're also potentially thinking about hosting up to 3 virtual meetings. And the virtual meetings are intended to help us have a broader reach as well, since we can, go to that many in-person communities as well. So, and over the next few slides, I will just kind of walk you through the process we follow to identify some of the potential communities to host in-person dialogue sessions. And as I go through the next few slides, I would like you to think about, whether you agree or disagree with the process we followed to identify some of these communities. We're going to be doing some of the polling also just to kind of get a temperature check about the process we followed. We also would like to hear your reactions about some of these communities we have identified and let us know what other locations we're missing and also what are going to be some of your top locations to prioritize some of these in-person meetings. And the last question as well for you to think about is how you would like to participate maybe in some of these community dialogues that we're hoping to have. So those are questions for you to have in mind as I go over the next slides. Can you click next slide, please? Great, so now I will be walking you through the process we followed to select the top communities. Also, you have to host these public meetings as well. So to begin with, we compile a list from different sources. So one of the first source we utilized was the AB 617 communities. And as some of you might know, these are the communities in the Community Air Protection Program. And under the program, these communities are selected every year to help develop and implement community air monitoring plans and community emission reductions plans as well. So that was our first source. The second source was the Blueprint 2.0 document. And this document recommends potential communities that should become AB 617 communities. And the third source, I think some of you already mentioned it and might remember, we had a public meeting back in January of 2023 to kick off this project, the community engagement model. So we did receive some recommendations about where to host potential community meetings. So we took those into account as well and added them to the list, in addition to some of the suggestions that were recommended by the work group working on this. So in total, when we combine all those resources, we came up with a list of up to 80 communities where we could potentially host public meetings. So after we did this, the next step was to divide the state into 9 regions. And to use all of this process, we utilized Column Bioscreen to help us identify the most impacted communities. So in utilizing Column Bioscreen, we also filter for communities that ranked in the 75th percentile or higher for most impacted communities, and also for population characteristics. And in doing this, a filtering process and utilizing Column Bioscreen, it gave us a narrow list of 40 communities. So there's also some overlap on some of the communities. We utilize filtering column screen and utilizing the 3 sources that I just mentioned, the AB 617, the Blueprint 2.0, and the other suggestions we received from some of you, those that participated back in January when we had the meeting. So by the end of this step, we went from 80 communities to 40 communities. And we did an additional step that helped us identify and help us narrow the list of 40 communities to some smaller number. And so what we did with that, we utilized a sort of like a ranking method to identify the top communities. And so in order for us to develop this ranking method, we did essentially 4 things. The first thing we did was dropped the AB 617 communities. And the reason we did this is because we also wanted to prioritize communities where CARB doesn't already have a presence or has engaged at a minimal level with some communities. So in the list that we will share later with you, as an example, you will not see Oakland or Stockton or San Francisco, an example, because those cities have already some AB 617 communities listed as well. The other thing we did to help us with the ranking is we prioritize communities. They have a larger percentage of impacted population living in that community in comparison to the overall population with that community. And again, we wanted to make sure that we are also prioritizing communities that are most impacted and are also densely populated. The other step we took was to also prioritize those communities, again, that fall under the 75 percentile or higher for most impacted communities for population characteristics, again, using the Column screen. Screening tool. And the last step we took was to just prioritize also the communities that were listed in the Blueprint 2.0. And again, through this process, so the Blueprint 2.0, if you're not familiar with it, this is a document that is often created in collaboration with the other districts and some communities as well to develop this list. And so at the end of this step, we went from 40 communities to 14. And as I mentioned before as well, we divided the state into 9 regions, but we are only selecting the top 2 communities in 7 regions. And we did this because the 2 regions where we didn't select any communities is because according to the Column screen, these 2 regions have less burdened communities or census tracts and are also less densely populated. But we hope to compensate for this gap with the virtual meetings as well. And so in summary, basically the process we follow was to go through this process of producing a list of 2 communities for each of the 7 regions across the state where we could potentially host the dialogue sessions. So if you recall, we went from 80 communities to 40 to 14 that we will share with you in the next slide. And so we also acknowledge that this process might not be perfect to prioritize these communities, but we thought this could be one appropriate approach to do that as well. So we understand there's a lot of challenges and caveats with that. Can you click the next slide, please? Great. So hopefully this map will help better visualize that process that I just described to you, help clarify what I just covered earlier. So one of the few things that I want to highlight from this maps is that you will see again, the state was divided into 9 regions shown here by different color outlines. And as I mentioned, we only selected locations for 7 regions and not the 9 regions, but we, as I said, we hope to compensate for this gap with the virtual meetings. So now I'm just gonna ask for folks sharing the slides, can you please click next so we can zoom in into kind of the Northern California area so I can walk you through some of the markers that are in this map. So I want to bring your attention to, for example, the green pins on the map that are representing the AB 617 communities. You will also see some orange pins that are representing the communities that are listed on the Blueprint 2.0 and the cities that were recommended by members of the public from the January meeting and also other staff from this work group. You will also see here the dark green pins that also represents where the community express, where you're coming from. So you also see that representation here. So you can have at least a better idea of some of the communities that we're proposing for this process. I also want to emphasize that there are some city outlines here. You'll see the outline in black, and so these are the original the 40 communities that we identified to this selection process that then help us narrow our list to 14. And so just bringing your attention to the blue stars here and the hot pink diamonds. Now the blue stars represent the first priority rank locations, and the hot pink diamonds represent the second priority rank locations where we propose to host some of these community dialogue sessions. I also want to let you know that both of the stars and diamonds are also labeled on the map. So you will see, for example, US City as being a first priority ranking, and Sacramento a second priority ranking, and so on and so forth for like Vallejo, San Jose, which is the Bay Area, and you will see now the city of Modesto for the San Joaquin Valley region as well. So I also want you to know that the boundaries that you will see on this map are not precise in some instances, and we're only trying to show you proximity. And also what we're trying to say that, for example, in some regions, looking, for example, here in the Bay Area, the geographic locations, some communities are relatively close to one another. So for example, if we were to host an in-person meeting in Vallejo, there is a likelihood that communities from Richmond, Oakland, San Francisco, and other communities will be able to participate in this conversation. And if not, we're opening up the virtual meetings as a way to help bridge that gap. And so with that, in the next slide, you will see the complete list of 14 cities. And this is where we'll pass it back to Julia for us to have a discussion and answer maybe any questions you might have about this process that will follow to get us here.
Great. Thank you, Jose. Thanks for outlining exactly how you guys arrived at those 14 cities. Before we continue with our discussion, those questions that are on the slide, we did have a comment in the chat from Lillian. She's letting us know that the CES doesn't properly represent certain communities in her area, i.e. the Salton Sea. So just checking to see if, Jose, if you have a comment, maybe reflect a little bit more of that particular area. And additionally, that is something that we can address when we go over the cities that were selected and if there are any missing that we should include.
Yes, I definitely agree with Lillian about this question. And we definitely know, and there's a lot of us that know that Columbine Screen definitely leaves out a lot of communities. And so, as I mentioned before, we acknowledge that, using this screening tool is also leaving a lot of room for improvement in terms of identifying the proper communities to prioritize for in-person meetings. So that's why we wanted to be transparent on how we arrive here, and also hear from you, in addition to our list here, what else, what other locations are we missing and which ones we need to prioritize.
Okay, great. Lisa, I see your hand up if you have a question about the process of how we arrived at those 14 cities.
Yeah, I am just like, my first response was, this is nuts. Fresno was the first AB 617. Our air quality isn't getting better. I understand Bakersfield. I see Modesto as a political pick. I see a lot of these things as political picks and not actually helping the people that really need it in some of the other areas. I have to go along with the Salton Sea, and that whole area down there in Imperial Valley is just bad. Fresno is really bad. I don't know if anybody's ever spent a summer here. It's just bad. And for it not to be included, the only comment I have to say is it's nuts, and it looks like it was a political determination. Because if you were really looking at the environmental impact and where you would get the most, you would have included Fresno.
Okay. Thank you, Lisa. And we are going to, once we kind of get through your initial comments and questions about how we arrived at those 14 cities, we're going to go through each region and then include any suggestions that you have for additional cities that should be included in that list. And then we're going to run a poll so that we can rank those options, all of those options, after we've included your additional suggestions. Leonora, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. So I don't have any comments about the specific cities chosen for this, but it's just more about the larger process of this and you know, I guess this is going to be kind of like the main themes of the issues that I'm bringing up in the community engagement model. You know, because I think this is sort of the you know, this is kind of like demonstrating, I think, some of the problems that are going on with like the way community engagement is approached. And so like what I'm gonna, you know, I guess when we get like more into the substance of the community engagement model, I want to talk about, you know, sort of you know, not like thinking about who gets to participate in these things, you know. Like I appreciate and I heard that there was like a lot of thought put into representing places that have been underrepresented at CARB in the past, and I think that's a really good intent, and you know, I admire that a lot, but I think like we need to move to community engagement where it's like that's you know, like representation is built into the system, you know, in a high quality way. And so it's not like, oh, we're having to compensate for it in like you know, like with this kind of method that you're using here. Plus like I think, you know, when you're not like building it in to the system of representation, then it's like, then I think, you know, you're going to hear a lot of concerns like Lisa brought up, which I think is like really valid, where it's like there's always going to be those questions like, how did this place get chosen over another place, and like, was that a political decision? Like I think, you know, when there's like this subjective choice going on, it's like that's always going to be like, I think that's going to just erode the trust around this. So I mean, like I want to talk about that like a lot, you know, in depth when we get into the community engagement model. Plus like I think that there needs to be more thought about this in terms of like how, like, is this going to be like a democratic system of engagement or not? And I did notice in the community engagement model there was like no mention of democracy or democratic systems. And so I think like again we're kind of, you know, coming at it this way where it's like CARB is deciding like who they want to reach out to and like who they want to listen to at the outset is gonna result in systems that are like not fully democratic, and you know, it gonna lead to this distrust. And then of course like I think you know, it's important like how this engagement is going to happen in each of these cities, but you know, we haven't really talked about that yet, so maybe I'll save my comments on that for later.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Lenora. So thanks for bringing up those issues. So I heard that it feels like some of these choices might be political choices. So looking to our CARB staff and Jose, if you're able to explain, perhaps we can go back to a few of those slides, exactly how we arrived at that decision. I see your hand up.
Yes. So yeah, there isn't a political decision about this, and of course, as similar to the process we follow with the draft community engagement model, we also didn't want to have this conversation coming empty-handed, saying that we didn't do anything, you know, to at least propose where we could potentially host some of this meeting. So that's why, you know, we're asking for your help. That's why I ask you to think about, you know, whether you think this process is, whether you are in agreement or not with this process. And again, thinking about from this list, is there any communities that you think we should prioritize, and also what are some of the other locations that we're missing? Yes, we're definitely missing, as Elena noted here, we're missing unincorporated cities within this list as well. So we definitely want to hear, you know, all of the other things that we're missing, and that's why we're having this conversation here to ask for your help and let us know to help us figure it out where can we host this in-person meeting. But as I did mention earlier, we do have the capacity to host up to 7 in-person meetings as well. So that's something else that we need to think about and have in mind.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jose. And I see a follow-up from Leonora in the chat. I'm not meaning to say that this is a political situation in this case, but when CARB is choosing at the outset who you're going to reach out to, it just is going to feel unfair and raise suspicion. So maybe a call for more transparency in terms of how we're arriving at those decisions. Catalina and Anita, I see your hands up. I'm just going to provide a little bit of context here before we continue our conversation, so hang tight. I see your hands up and I'll get there. Okay, so these 14 cities that you see on the screen were based on work from CARB staff that you heard Jose walk through. And these are the proposed locations for the 7 regions. The cities for each region are ranked in priority on that list. So Yuba City would be ranked first in priority, and then Sacramento and Arden second, as an example. And the goal is to select 1 city per region to host the dialogue sessions. So after identifying the locations, the next steps for CARB staff would be to secure venues, which will be public neutral spaces such as community centers, and then to set up those dates to host the community dialogues. So it's important to note that there are some time and resource constraints on this work that we want to be transparent about, and that we need to be starting these dialogues soon. So those restraints or constraints are that CARB only has a budget to cover all associated costs. So that's travel and securing venues for 7 in-person community dialogue sessions, as Jose mentioned. And there's limited staff capacity to travel and participate in the work. And the deadline to host community dialogue sessions is no later than February 2024 to allow enough time to incorporate comments from them, and then have the community experts review and comment on the revised draft model before the contract with community experts ends in on April 30th, 2024. So as a follow-up to this meeting, we will be sending out an email asking for any ideas on potential locations and community members that should attend. Where in these communities do we need to be hosting these events? Okay. So just wanted to provide a little bit of context there before we continue discussing. And Catalina and Mitha, I saw your hands up. We'll start with Catalina.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I appreciate the thoughtfulness and the work that, went into this process of selecting top priority communities, or, identifying priority communities. And I just think that process itself should be something that is standardized and is part of the community engagement model. I think this is something that CARB staff run into all the time when doing engagement, for a plan or, a new rule, or, it's always like, where do we go? So I think like standardizing and making that part of the model actually would be something really helpful to like standardize. And then I just wanted to uplift some of the things that folks said in terms of, yeah, I noticed, I appreciate the thought that was given to, let's reach the most people as possible by focusing on density. But what about, communities that are, more out of the way, or, more rural. So I know those folks always feel excluded. And I'm from Los Angeles, but I know, in other parts of the state, distances are really long. So I think I support the more regional focus and making sure that there's consideration for how accessible by transit these locations are. And also I feel like also agree with the point that unincorporated communities are not included here as well. And I'll finally just had a question about do these community meetings include compensation for participants, and then are participants also provided compensation for travel.
Great, thank you for those questions.
Yeah, thank you for the
We had-
question. And related to the compensation for participating and covering travel expenses, unfortunately, there isn't any for that. So that's one of the other kind of challenges that we're running into as well for holding these meetings.
Great, thank you, Jose. So I think there was a question about compensation, and then also we have in the chat that kind of goes with that, is childcare going to be available, food, or what incentives are going to be available for participants who come to these meetings? And I believe also compensation for travel is mentioned as well. And that may be something that, you know, there's some issues that I know the CARB team is conferring on in the background. So maybe we'll table that for a little bit while they get to confer about it. And Lisa, I've seen your hand up for a few minutes. Thanks for being patient.
Yeah, let me just tell you, whatever meeting you have in Bakersfield, I'm not going. Or Modesto, I'm not going. Transit or not, I'm not going. Because I really, travel. Anyway, how can I put this? You understand that in the Central Valley, you really cannot assume people may carpool, people may vanpool, people may get together and go. But one of the things you have to consider is the weather. Come Thanksgiving, the fog starts. And it starts and it continues all the way through February. So you may actually be losing people in between Modesto and Bakersfield. Me, I don't like driving in the fog at night. I won't do it. Seen too many accidents, know too much statistics. And I will have to agree with others who have put in the comments. You're definitely going to have childcare. If you expect people to drive more than 15 minutes, if you're expecting people to drive an hour, you're going to need to feed and water them. You're going to need to at least have some, an igloo of punch, which should cost you less than $10, and some food to feed people. You're definitely going to need court reporters for those individuals who may not know how to write, but will verbally comment, so you can capture everything. But yeah, the Valley in November from February, that's interesting. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Lisa, for bringing up that really specific feedback about, you know, regional considerations that would have to be taken into account to plan a meeting in that space. Gustavo, I see your hand up. We're gonna take your comment and question, and then I want to kind of refocus into these particular cities, your reactions to those cities, and then also, I think most importantly, your suggestions for what you would put on that list. So I want to make sure that we have time for that. Gustavo.
Yeah, thank you. And this is just a clarifying question. I'm sure it was already mentioned, I didn't catch it. Is the kind of essence of these ground truthing conversations like post us creating like a model, or like while we're creating a model, go to these communities and go to them?
Yeah, great question. Jose, I know you've been taking you've been fielding fielding a lot of answers. So any of the other CARB staff want to
I'll
respond to this?
try to answer some of your questions. So, and then other folks can chime in. One of the things sort of like similar, I think it was Lana who mentioned that in the community engagement model, we have in the current draft, we have identified, for example, specific questions that we would like for all the community experts to get their responses and recommendations on. So similar, we're trying to follow, at least this is what we're thinking about in terms of following a similar process when we're hosting the virtual and in-person meetings, is that we have some general questions that we're asking all participants to help us, understand what are some of the key things that we need to have in mind when it comes to incorporating community engagement, and what are some of the recommendations that community can share with us. So we're kind of framing it in that way. But of course, one of the other questions we have here is like, what are other ideas or suggestions you think you can help us with to make sure that when we have these conversations, whether it's via online or in person, we're actually asking the right questions and getting the right responses from community to help us improve the model. So again, we didn't want it to come empty-handed, and we definitely that's why we're collaborating with you to help us navigate this. Of course, we also acknowledge that we some of us as staff, this is maybe the first time they're doing community engagement, so we're not as familiar, and we definitely need a lot of your support on this process as well.
Got it. Thank you. And just a clarifying question is these meetings that you're talking about that we're looking at here in front of us now, the ground truthing conversations, the community expert panel here assembled has 7 tasks in front of us, right? These conversations will happen after the 7 tasks have been completed, or this happens in between?
Yes. So this public meetings happen in between. So again, we're gonna meet next time in a month. And so by the next time we meet, that's the third time we meet, that's when we're actually gonna be concluding or have concluded all of our meetings or public meetings. So it's gonna be happening at the same time.
Great, thank you, Jose. All right, so we're going to go through now each of the regions. This is where we really need your feedback right now. And you'll see the 2 city options in there, but I'm going to go region by region and see if there are any cities that you would add to that list that need to be considered as a location for holding a meeting. So we're going to start with Sacramento Valley. So let's just do Sacramento Valley. Are there any other locations that you think need to be included and considered for a meeting in Sacramento Valley? Richard, go ahead.
Okay, great. Thanks. I figured raise the hand. In the Sacramento Valley, I would consider actually a toss-up between Sacramento Arden and Sacramento Meadowview as communities.
Okay. Okay, so Sacramento Arden and Sacramento Meadowview.
Although Yuba City would still stay number 1 on my list, especially because it is very close to the Capay Valley area there, which of course has some unique problems all in its own. So Yuba City would still remain number 1, but if you were going to look at number 2, you might think about Sacramento Meadowview alongside Sacramento Arden.
Great. Thank you very much, Richard. Heather?
I just want to share that I have currently up a climate and economic justice screening map. If anyone wants that to really get the data of where we can best have or host cities due to climate, all that other stuff, I will put it in the link if that's all right.
Yep, that's great.
Okay.
Thank you, Heather. All right, so we have limited time to get through these cities. Really want to make sure that we're getting your suggestions. Any other suggestions for Sacramento? You.
I have a, should I go ahead and speak? I haven't been.
Anita, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you. When you target this on a city, is this presuming that you are just going to be, how wide a radius are you going to be inviting to this meeting or in ground truthing exercise?
Okay, I'm sorry. My headphones died right as you were speaking. So could you reiterate, please, the suggestion that you had for?
Yeah. Okay, mine is general. Mine is in the methodology. When you list a city here, my question is, how wide is the radius? Is it just, are invitations, just notices just going to be sent to the persons in that city, or is it the metropolitan area or county, or how wide is the radius? That's my question.
Yep, so hand up.
Yes, that is a really good question, Anita, and maybe that can help us, help clarify a little bit too. So at least for the cities, this is where, within the city, let's say a community center, that's where we'll probably host the meeting, a community center. But of course, the invitation will go to as many contacts and organizations within the entire region. So that's kind of the scope. But again, just having in mind that for at least for what we're providing here, just to host that meeting, for example, like in a community center in Yuba City, but having in mind that we will be targeting a broader outreach based on the context we have and all the suggestions maybe from organizations that you also have in mind that maybe are not on our list as well. But the targeted invitation will be for the entire region.
Okay, thank you. So maybe that's something that we can also provide. That's another way to perhaps address some of this, to make it more inclusive, to increase the outreach.
Great, thank you. All right, I'm going to keep us moving because we have limited time here. So I don't see any other suggestions for Sacramento Valley, Bay Area. Please feel free to put in the chats any suggestions you have of a missing location or somewhere you think they should hold a meeting in the Bay Area. Okay, I see Oakland and Bayview Hunters Point, and 2 supportive votes for Bayview Hunters Point. All right. What about San Joaquin Valley? We have Bakersfield and Modesto on the list. And thank you.
My viewpoint of Fresno.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with this list. And then also like in Fresno and in Stockton, there are AB 617 communities, but they're limited. Like the Fresno is limited to Southwest Fresno, and it does not encompass all of Fresno. And in Stockton, it encompasses the port communities of Stockton, but not all of Stockton. So if it was, if we were to add additional communities, I would definitely support Fresno to be part of that, because Fresno is one of the biggest cities in the entire San Joaquin Valley, and then also Stockton.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I see a lot of support for that in the chat among your fellow community experts. We have Fresno, Richmond, Stockton, Merced, and Bakersfield is on the list. So Bakersfield and Fresno. All right.
Just to clarify, Richmond is for Bay Area. Is that
Oh,
correct?
great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So moving on to the Central Coast. The Central Coast. We have Salinas and Santa Maria. Okay, thank you, Violeta. So from here, it should be Richmond, Oakland, Vallejo, San Jose. Okay. All right, any other suggestions for Central Coast outside of Salinas and Santa Maria? Okay, and a note from Maria, Fresno's more centrally is more central and unincorporated communities would be more able to participate. Thank you. Watsonville has a suggestion for Central Coast. Thank you. All right, moving on to Inland Empire. We have selected Ontario and Riverside. What other cities do you think should be on that list? For Inland Empire. Okay, we see in the chat Bloomington and Rialto and Coachella Valley and Salton Sea shoreline communities. Another vote for Coachella Valley and a call to include tribal communities and Salton Sea communities.
And Heather has her hand raised too.
Oh, great. Go ahead, Heather.
I also want to include San Bernardino City. I think I put it earlier in the chat, but mostly where the communities have an inland port because of the pollution that it's causing health issues. And in these areas, I feel like you'll probably get the best impact of and really deep conversation because San Bernardino is working on their city playbook, and they're already working on community engagement. And I feel like this goes along the topic that we are really focusing on in this city.
Okay, great. Thank you, Heather. All right, so we'll add that. Okay, Los Angeles County. We have Compton and San Fernando listed there. Thank you, Leonora. For LA, there are a lot of places missing, of course, but it might be worth it to consider East locations too. East LA, SGV, and gateway cities. We have suggestion for Watts and Pacoima, Southgate, and unincorporated cities, or sorry, communities, East LA, South LA, and East San Gabriel. Great. And we see some common answers there. East LA, Southgate, and Pacoima. All right, our last one, San Diego. Any cities that you would add for San Diego? And Imperial. Okay, Herbert. Thank you, Jasmine. All right, any other suggestions for San Diego? Imperial. Heber. Thank you, Jasmine. All right, so I'm going to check with Joyce. She has been editing our poll to include your suggestions as we've been going through these. Joyce, can you give me a thumbs up if we're ready to launch the poll?
Almost ready. Give me one moment.
No problem. Take a minute.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much, Joyce.
Yeah. I will launch it. I hope I captured everything.
We have the chat as well.
Yeah.
That we can always use as a record. Okay, so you'll see here all those locations and the additions from all the community experts. So please go through and pick your top location for each region. you had to select a top location.
I mean, so I have to pick a location from these other regions where I'm like not as familiar. I mean, I don't know if I'm super comfortable with that.
Well, if you're not comfortable providing input on that, I don't think the response is required. So definitely feel free to defer maybe to some of the other community experts who are more familiar with that region.
That's why we have the no preference option. So you can just put that if you're not too familiar with the region.
Perfect. Thanks, Jonathan. All right. All right, you guys are moving quickly. Okay, and are there any of our community experts for whom the poll is not working? If you could raise your hand, just want to make sure everyone's able to give their input. Okay, Anita, the poll is not working for you?
No, I put a comment in there and Lillian did as well, that the Salton Sea was still not listed on the poll options.
Okay.
Oh, shoot. Sorry about that.
Great. So maybe those folks who would pick the Salton Sea as your top pick for that particular region, can you please put in the chat Salton Sea top pick? And then we'll take your responses from the chat and incorporate that into the poll results. So any folks who would pick Salton Sea as their top choice. And Elena has a question. Is this the final time we'll be discussing this? I don't think it's the final time we'll be discussing the methodology for choosing cities to hold community engagement events in. But I'm going to defer to the CARB staff on whether or not there will be another conversation on these particular cities.
I'll chime in, then I'll let Elford chime in as well. I think given all the great conversation and questions we're getting about this, I think we will definitely have a conversation. I think based on the responses that we get from the poll here, we're also going to follow up with an email. And I think, yeah, we need to figure it out as well. But I think we will probably have some time at the next meeting to talk about this if we don't all come into consensus from all the community experts. But yeah, definitely we're going to have another conversation about this to make sure that we have our top 7 communities for to host these public meetings.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jose. So it looks like we have all of the community expert responses on the poll, so we can go ahead and end the poll and share results. Okay, maybe we can send out these results to folks after the meeting as well. So you have time to see what your fellow community experts thought. All right. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. All right, we can go to the next one. Okay. Thank you guys so much. Sorry, we're running just a few minutes late, and it looks like we might need to do some follow-up on the selection of cities. So we'll be discussing that. Really want to thank you all for a productive meeting, all of your comments and questions and suggestions. We are going to drop now into the chat a meeting evaluation form.
And this is your opportunity to give us some feedback on this meeting and any improvements that we could make. So please take a few minutes, click on that link, and fill out the meeting evaluation form so that we can get a good idea of how we did and what we might improve in the future going forward. And we are at time, but feel free to stay in the meeting and fill out that meeting evaluation form. And while folks are doing that, I'm just going to check in with Carb and see if you guys have any final wrap-up thoughts or comments for folks as we finish up tonight.
Julia, do you mind, or Joyce, if the poll results can get shown so that people know what came out of that while they're wrapping up? And we'll also be sure to share that with everyone, but just, I know it closed quickly for people.
Okay, I'm sharing them again.
Great, thanks, Deidre. And thank you, Joyce. Any questions about the meeting evaluation form? Are you all able to use that link? Great, thanks, Gustavo. Okay, we had a request to send the results of the poll out, and Deidre has responded that yes, we will be sending the results of the poll out. Great, thank you so much for your time, Heather. Thank you so much, Leonora. Thank you for your comments. Thank you, Lillian. Have a good night. Good night, Richard.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, Gustavo. Thank you, Catalina. Thank you, Vanessa.
Have a great night, all.
Thank you.